All right, let's kick things off. Like I said, my name is Joe Amditis. I'm Assistant Director of Products and Events at the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University, and I am very excited to be joined today by our amazing and brilliant host and instructor for today's workshop, Heather Bryant. You can see on your screen now. Go ahead and please introduce yourself, say hi, tell us who you are, where you're coming to us from, who you're with, what you're excited about, whatever you want in the chat. We are going to be monitoring the chat pretty actively myself throughout this session. And so please, if you have any issues or questions that you want us to make sure Heather sees, you can post them there. And if Heather's screen sharing, I'll just share them with her at the appropriate time. Otherwise, if you have any issues or technical problems, go ahead and send me a DM on Zoom. One thing about that, you want to make sure that you're very cognizant of who those messages are going to so that you don't send me a private message that you meant for the whole group, or even worse, the opposite, where you send a message that was meant to be private to the whole group. And another thing here, you can actually do nested replies. If you hover your mouse over the Zoom chat in any particular message, you can have whole conversations in there with each other, and we encourage you to do so. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and just hand it over to Heather, who will lead us on this workshop today. Again, I'll be behind the scenes if you need anything, but with that, Heather, I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Joe. Hi, everybody. It's awesome that you made time in your really busy days for this conversation. I'm excited for what we're going to work on today together. We're calling this a workshop, but it's really, in keeping with all of the things that we like to work on. This is actually a very collaborative thing that we're going to be doing here today. And I'm excited for this conversation. So what I want to do is just I'm going to take a few minutes and add some context for what it is we're talking about today and why we're talking about this step, because this is actually part of a series of ongoing discussion groups and working groups and conversations about tackling this particular aspect of collaborations with other organizations. So I want to do a little bit of table setting just so that we're all looped in and we're all caught up with where we're at with this work. But let me back up really quick and introduce myself. So I'm Heather Bryant. I am currently serving as the ED for the Tiny News Collective. We help small, very, very local news organizations get off the ground and get running across the US in areas that are unserved or underserved by existing media organizations. One of our missions is helping diversify media ownership in the US. That is a very collaborative process in and of itself. And then before that, I did a lot of work around collaborations. I've done a lot of work with the Center for Cooperative Media over the past few years, and I've done a lot of research projects and advising projects around collaboration. This is very much my absolute area of fascination and adoration within the field of journalism. So I'm really excited to get to be in this space and to work with people who are also invested in the idea of how we can make collaborations between organizations, and not just news organizations, but all types of organizations or individuals and other types of stakeholders, to make them equitable, to make them efficient, to make them meaningful, and to make them have the actual impact that we want them to have within the communities that we're serving. So I'm excited for this conversation, excited for where we'll continue to go with this work. So where we're actually at in this started about a year ago, really, when we started talking about what does it mean to actually start to articulate policies around collaboration. Most of us are in organizations that have, we have editorial policies, we have transparency about revenue, we have ethics policies. We're kind of familiar with those things. We create them, we establish them, we're transparent about them, we share them with our communities. But as more and more organizations start to work together, either really actually formally collaborating with each other, or they start to kind of lend a hand to one another, as things come up, we started kind of tossing around this question of is this, we're at a point in a time where we need to have more formal policies between our organizations, but also with the members of our community, so that we are transparent and accountable for what does it mean when we work together with another organization, and what does that mean for our responsibilities to our audience. So we actually started this conversation last year with what would it look like to put together a public-facing policy about when our organizations do collaborations, what does that mean? How do we share that with our communities? How are we transparent about what does it look like for our orgs to partner? How do we take responsibility for who we partner with and the impact that could potentially have on our community? We were talking to a lot of small organizations who are no stranger to, for example, something significant and nationally newsworthy happens in a small community. It's not unusual that other news organizations will start to show up in that community and ask for help or leads or connections or introductions, right? What does it mean to be responsible for doing that type of assistance to other news organizations? So we started having that conversation about what does it mean to partner? What does it mean to lend assistance to another news organization, and how am I accountable for that? So that kicked off this conversation, and what we arrived at was 3 areas of focus for this policy work. The first one was the community that you serve. So in the way that we have all these other policies about how we do what we do, we were interested in creating this public facing policy that explains to our community what collaboration is when we do it, how will we be transparent, how will we be accountable about it. The second bucket of work was potential partners that you might work with. And this came out of a conversation with a number of folks who, a lot of people will start with collaborations by working with someone you have maybe an existing professional relationship with, or there's something kind of there that has brought you together and you're ready to work with each other. But as you do more and more collaborations, you might want to create opportunities for people you've never worked with before or didn't even know was a possibility to work with, to start to engage and figure out, okay, could we do something together? So the second bucket of work is the potential partners you might work with, and that's going to be the focus today. Is what is required to bring together groups of people, organizations, and actually be able to figure out, okay, can I work with them? Can they work with us? Do we know what that's actually going to mean if we do so? How do I evaluate them as a potential partner? How do I figure out what this is going to create in terms of how we structure the work that we're going to do together? So that's going to be largely the focus of this conversation, and the policies that you might create, the MOUs that you might create, the way that you design your actual collaborations. And then the third piece of this work is the actual members of your collaboration. And so there's no shortage of formats and levels of formality that can be applied to a partnership. So this is whether you need like a formal memorandum of understanding that lawyers are going to be looking at, or just a simple scope of work. And there are options to help document all of these things. And so that's the next bucket of work that we're going to get into. And we're going to be doing a session on that as well at the Collaborative Journalism Summit. So at the end of all of this, the idea is what we are creating here is a series of resources for any organization for here's how you can articulate collaboration as a policy to your community. Here's how you articulate what does collaboration look like for your organization to any potential partners so that they come in with an understanding of that. And then how do you actually document and agree upon the bounds and the scope of the collaboration. So that's the goal of this work. This is a long running stream of work. This is kind of in the middle section of that. But what we're hoping is that we create this pretty nice comprehensive set of resources where you can articulate what this is for your organization, and for you, how your organization needs these collaborations to function in order for them to be viable for you. This is not necessarily always the simplest thing to do. This involves money, it involves time, it involves power dynamics, it involves, potentially sensitive communities. There's a lot that goes into this. And so this work is just kind of helping give us all something we can refer to and ground ourselves in when we start to figure out, okay, but now that we're actually doing this, what does this look like to actually do this work together? So the way that I have kind of outlined this session today, it is not going to be me talking at you for 90 minutes because no one's going to enjoy that. We're going to have some breakout groups and kind of just work our way through 2 questions. We have 2 main questions for today. We'll do breakout groups so that folks can kind of talk them through, and this can be a little bit more interactive, and then we'll do some share outs. We'll talk about, the important aspects of like the realities of our organizations and the realities of collaboration. And then we'll plan next steps for whomever wants to continue on to engage with this topic or participate in future discussions, or just make sure that you get all the resources sent to you once we kind of have our materials together. So it looks like we have a little over 20 people. I have created a Jamboard for us so that we actually have a space to work together to create sticky notes on them together as a board. They're just labeled like group 1 through, I think we can probably do maybe 5 groups with 23 people. Joe, do you think that's good?
Yeah, that sounds good. Four
Make
or five groups.
make space for people to have conversations. So we're going to tackle our first question here in a little bit, but I also want to make space for any questions about the history of this and where we're at before we dig into the discussion groups. Because I just kind of threw a lot of information at you there. I want to make sure everybody feels like they understand where we're at this time with doing this work before we start digging into our work together. I'm just going to peek at the chat really quick. All right. Not seeing any, so let me do a little bit of table setting for this question. So before you can structure, you know, an agreement for how a collaboration works, before you can really like get into it, you have to understand who it is you're actually working with, and they need to understand things about you. I've done this exercise before with organizations who are like trying to figure out what does it mean for us to actually partner. And this is a good exercise because there are a lot of things that you know about you that you don't even like think about as a thing of like, oh, I should tell a potential partner, until you run into a misunderstanding or a reality of how your organization works that kind of suddenly changes things. And this can also be true about your potential partners. So the question that I wanted us to tackle in our first group breakout here discussion is like, what are the things that you need to know about a potential partner before you can decide this will work for us, that I can work with you as an organization. And I can give you some examples here about like, what do you need to know about them in terms of how like who they are, their mission, who they serve, things like that. What are the things that you need to know to evaluate, is this going to work? Like, is there something here? Are we compatible from a mission perspective, from a values perspective, from a way we actually think about our audience type perspective? So this is a question we'll tackle in groups. And I want you to have the space to kind of just talk through like what comes to mind when you're like, oh, I need to know this about someone before I know if I can partner with them, and see what you come up with. So we'll split into groups for about maybe like 8 minutes or so, 10 minutes or so. We'll see how it goes. We have plenty of time together today, and I don't want to rush through the conversations. And then we'll come back and we'll talk it through as a group, and I'll try to bounce around a little bit as we go. But as you get into a Jamboard with your group, just pick, I think the groups will be numbered when we do breakout, if I remember how Zoom does this.
They will. Yep.
Yeah, pick the slide with the number that corresponds to your group number and drop your notes there. And then we'll come back together about and talk this through about what are the things that are just critical for us to understand about a partner before we can evaluate whether or not we can actually work with them. Is it going to work for us? The flip side of this will be the latter half of the conversation about what do people need to understand about us, but we'll dig into that later. So you'll have a chance to get into that. For now, think about it from the perspective of what do you need to know about a potential partner in order to work with them.
Okay.
So let's do our.
Want me to open them now?
Please, thank you, Joe.
You will automatically be moved into a group. You can return to the main room at any time, and I'll be watching the list in case we have any groups that dwindle. So here we go.
Thank you so much.
Okay, did you want to go into any of the rooms?
Yeah, I'm thinking about whether I might be able to bounce around. I just want to make sure that I don't mess up the Zoom controls as I do it.
Okay. I see some people in. I'm gonna move Mariella to room 1.
We can reduce the number of rooms if we
And
need to.
I'm gonna move Sam Shramsky to room 2. There we go. Okay, now we have 4 groups, 4
Thanks.
rooms with at
That
least
works.
3 people in each one. Yeah, and we can pop in and like check on people and stuff as we need. And I see here, just keeping an eye on the Jamboard.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, and you should be able to navigate in and out if you want as well.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go pop into one and just I'll move around a little bit.
Cool, I'll do the same.
I'll switch to screen share as well, just so as we kind of come through and do some of the
Yeah,
share out here, we're all
you should
looking
be able to screen share.
excellent.
Oh, wait a minute. Dark mode
Mhm.
in Jamboard? What's up?
It's a browser extension called Dark Reader.
Okay, yeah, I was looking. I'm like, wait, where's the setting?
I put pretty much everything that can be put into dark mode. I put it in there because I just cannot handle all that bright light all the time.
It's yeah, I do the same thing. I had the extension turn off the lights for a while, but it was kind of weird. Dark Reader is good.
Yeah, it's the one that I found that gives me the most granular control. Hi, everybody. We're just chatting as we wait for folks to get back from breakout rooms. If anybody's curious, the reason my screen is in dark mode is I have a browser extension for it, just because I prefer not having bright white screens in my face all day long. So that's what we were chatting about, is browser extensions. Let's see, it looks like we have everybody back. Does that look right? There we go. All right. So I hope you had the opportunity for some interesting conversations, and I am kind of curious, like, to surface some of the trends and what came up here. It's very interesting where this question kind of leads people to, first off, because there are a lot of things that you could really be thinking about here, and then a lot of things that some other folks might have thought of that you want to learn from. So what I'd like to do is we'll just kind of take a look at each Jamboard and maybe have folks from each group do a little share out of, like, what was the primary thing that came up for you when you're thinking about evaluating a partner. And then I'd love, we're a small enough group to manage this, to kind of just have a little bit of a chat about this, about what does it mean to evaluate potential partners and identify, like, what are your criteria as an organization to figure it out. Can we work with them? Is this gonna work for us? So I thought we would start with group one here. If anybody from that group wants to kind of just unmute and say a little about, like, what was the thing that really came up for y'all, or say anything more about any of these particular tags that you felt was important for you in your conversations.
Which was group one?
I believe you were in group one.
It was Carol, Heather, Carol, Mariella, and Penda.
Yes.
So we, well, it was fantastic. We had a fantastic conversation, but not about any of this work. Sorry.
Tell us more.
So we really went around the room and introduced ourselves, and we just talked about the state of media and journalism, what we were all working on individually, and sort of some commonality amongst the group. And the next thing you know, it was over. So sorry.
No worries. No worries. That is how breakout rooms sometimes go. But anytime you can have meaningful conversations where you make connections with other people, I consider that a win for talking about collaboration anyway. So you still get points.
Thank you.
All right. So I guess I might be a little bit out of sync with, like, which group did this slide that we're looking at here now around clear sense of partners' interest. So if someone from that group wants to unmute.
That was us. Penda was just talking about us, and I would just say it's almost as if there was artificial intelligence operating, because it kind of put up these little post-its that related in many ways to things that we talked about. I mean, we did not get into things like finances and resource obligations, but we certainly got a clear sense of our partners' interests, and we actually found that we had a lot in common that would motivate us to potentially be interested in talking about working together, and we have goals I think media goals, communication goals in common in terms of public interest journalism, if I can make that assumption based on what I heard.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very exciting and fruitful.
Okay, good. glad to hear it. All right,
So I think the confusion is that group one is the Post-it notes we put down, but we are not technically group one. I think that's the source of confusion.
okay, thanks, Sam.
Um,
Well, we can jump to your group. Do you wanna say more about the themes in your conversation?
Sure. Yeah, I think there were things here that were more or less grouped together, but yeah, we talked about sense of partners' interests. You know, how do you hold each other accountable through scopes of work and goals, clear understanding of mission alignment between organizations and not just alignment with the project, I suppose. There were other things, I suppose, more mundane, such as finance and resource obligations. And these are types of things that people don't like to talk about, but need to be talked about with transparency in the very beginning, even if you do have mission alignment. And then I think more mundane things like even the types of communication, whether you both partners prefer things like email versus phone versus face-to-face, and then sort of what I suppose how to deal with potential conflicts where they arise and the like. Yeah, that was more or less what we came across.
Okay. I'm really intrigued by the ticket for make clear what each partner wants to do. And this kind of feels more like kind of philosophical strategy, like big picture thing. Is that accurate? Like journalism in the public interest is what I see written here, like what is happening in local context beyond legacy media. Is it, I don't know if you want to say more on this, but I'm intrigued by this one.
That was actually Juliana who spoke to that. So I don't know if I'm the best person to put that forward, but if Juliana, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the idea was that, you know, what is this in the interest of both parties working towards it, you know, the goal of public journalism and moving beyond sort of the status quo in legacy media, but that's really the only thing I took away.
No, it's just I was explaining that in Scotland we are building the first collaborative journalism project. So the experience that I have is from reading some reports because I never worked in a collaborative journalism before. And then I was saying that something that we are trying to do is meet frequently with partners to understand better what we want to do together, that is produce the journalism that is on the public interest, and then try to bring underreported stories that are not so common to see in the legacy media. We are just seeing this in local and hyper-local projects, and then we are trying to build on that to create this collaborative project.
Thank you. Let's see. If group 3, if the number's consistent, if group 3 and room 3 of the slide, does anybody want to kind of catch us up on some of the bigger themes of the conversation you had? Any of these that you want to draw or like expand upon? I think group 3, go ahead. Yeah.
I can start. And so we had a very diverse group that, you know, a lot of different types of collaboratives at different places, some in early formation thought. So we really just kind of, and then I come from, you know, as an established collaborative, but some of the questions that I thought of that, you know, early on, and then also I think the bigger thing was establishing how people publish and how people use content. Those seem to be really tied to kind of the immediate structure of forming the collaborative and asking those questions. A lot of that, like, how much do you know about the topic? What do your resources look like? And it all went back to like, how are you going to use content that we either create together or create or co-publish, etc.
Thank you.
Nicole, or anyone else, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I was trying to think of hi, Nicole here. I was trying to think of what we, mostly talked about, but like you said, I think it was a very, diverse group between us, a couple of us have just started working with partners. So one thing that really I guess is probably the first thing I kind of think about, which is what I think one of the first things we wrote down was who is your audience? Talking to our new partners, of course. Is this an audience that we might be overlooking ourselves, or is this an area that we're not an expertise at? Maybe they are. How can we better utilize them and work collaboratively together on a project, on sharing content, on producing something together? So that was kind of the first thing that I would need to know.
Great. Anybody else from this group want to add any other thoughts in? All right, we'll jump to the next one here. So for group 4, does somebody want to share things out? I think there's some tags catching my eye here that would be good conversation. Looks like room 4 was Cassandra, Jean, and SK Snow.
Sure. I can start.
Thank you.
I think two of the major points that we discussed was, do we have compatible organizational values? I think that's which Jean put forward, and I think that's very important. Are we basically, can we work together? And are we having the same goals in mind? Which also speaks to the other point, which is what does success for a partner on this project look like? And then other points, logistics in terms of like what does the timeline, what kind of timeline the partner organization has in mind for a potential project, and then who are we trying to reach? And I saw on one of the previous slides there was, which we also discussed, is like, is there an audience that we can potentially reach that we haven't been? And so there's an opportunity to, do that by way of this collaborative effort.
Mhm.
And then how much time can members devote to the project? And how each member of the partnering organization can contribute, like what are the strengths? And I know like that's probably something that we would discuss coming together to work on the project, but like, which person is designated for X role kind of thing.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. That is the bulk of our groups. I'm going to end my share here. So I'm kind of curious, like just things that people saw that they want to add on to, or things to expand on. I mean, one of the questions that I would have for this group, again, because we're small enough here to just have a conversation about this, is how do you kind of think about terms like priorities? As a potential partner approaches you, is it, is there, are our orgs compatible, like from a mission perspective thing? Is that like your first level of evaluation, or is it about the output of the potential project? I'm kind of curious if folks have kind of their own internal order of priority when they think about, oh, okay, can I work with this potential partner if they approach and say they want to do a project with you or work on something with you? I'm kind of curious, like, do you have an order of things that are like, has to be green on all of these before this would be viable for us? Or what might be your most your prioritized question when you're looking at a potential partner? Any
Yeah,
thoughts?
honestly, anything beyond that for your mental health.
For us here, I was thinking that the do you have compatible organizational values is kind of like the one because a lot of the others, if that's a no, a lot of the other stuff doesn't matter.
Mhm.
So for me, that's like where I'd start.
Mhm. Mhm. I'm kind of curious, how do you figure that out? Is that a conversation between you and them? Is that you going reporter on them and kind of like just checking into things they've done before and You know, do they walk the walk that goes along with what they say? How do you figure that out?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's both. I think it's like you doing, sleuthing, and not in a like a secretive way, like, coming to a meeting with having done some research so you can speak knowledgeably about stuff they've done and like be able to understand what was behind that. And like I wouldn't come with like an accusatory tone, but if there seems to be an area where there might be a conflict, don't leave that for the last 10 minutes of the meeting, bring it up soon enough, not necessarily first, but soon enough that like you can really engage on it in a fruitful way.
Yeah. Yes. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Jean, as well. One of the things that I kind of want to raise, like, why this conversation when it feels like this is kind of outside the scope of setting up a policy or setting up an agreement, is learning these things about your partners will guide what kind of agreement you actually have, right? Like, is there a dramatic power imbalance where things really have to be carefully scoped and agreed to in a way just to ensure that there's some equal footing for everybody? Or is there some aspect to a partner that you do want to work with, but it just, there you have to think about what is about them that's going to dictate like how you actually structure the relationship and how it works. So like this part of understanding who the partner is and then understanding yourself before you actually write the policies will go a long way to getting a lot of those policies kind of in place for you, and also guide which one you might apply to any given project. So that's some of the underpinning of this conversation here. So I think we could do is jump into the second one, and I think we'll do this one a little bit longer so that folks have some time to share about their organizations too, because I think that's a big part of this. So you can kind of expand on introductions you've done and talk a little bit more about your organization needs, and then tackle this question. Because this question is about like, what are the things that someone has to understand about your organization for them to actually successfully be able to work with you? So the question is, I'll grab this and put it into the chat for you. What does a potential partner need to understand about how your organization works in order to work with you? This is one of those questions that can be deceptively simple, because there's, the mission, the values piece of it, but then sometimes it's as simple as like, by the way, if you didn't realize, our newsroom is housed within a university, and that means university rules apply to everything we're doing. Or, our organization has this type of union and that governs things, how it works with our employees, or we have this type of thing or that stuff that is just kind of background noise to you at a certain point because it's just the world you work in, but is completely new to a potential partner, but could affect your collaboration. This is a helpful exercise to kind of run through. It's like, what do we actually need to tell others about the way that we work and the way that we do things, so that they understand what it might look like for them to work with us. So I want to make, I guess, space for this to be a decent length of conversation. We have like maybe 12 minutes for this one, Joe, when we schedule this, so that you can kind of dive into this and then add your notes to the Jamboard. What we're kind of creating out of this is then sort of like this draft of how do you articulate these things about your organization so a potential partner has like the lay of the land before they approach you, and then how you can also get this from a potential partner. And this will lead into the MOUs and agreements piece that we do next. So let's jump into breakout rooms. Let's do about 12 minutes or so, and we'll come back.
Just so you know, I went to recreate them and it reshuffled. So you may not be in the same room. I will allow you to move rooms if you want to change. I apologize for that.
I can see a recreate button on my view. Do you want me to try to hit it and see if I can put them back in the same one?
Well, it recreated an auto assignment when I did it. It's the same thing that happens, but I've changed the settings so you can move if you want to get back with your original group. If not, hang out where you are and we'll deal with it. Sorry about that.
Learn more works. Win either way. All right.
Is it okay if I show the socks to everybody? Because this was a small group.
Of course.
I'm here for the
All right.
things.
Let me share my screen.
I think you should be able to just copy and paste it into the chat, but you can share too. Look at
These
those.
these are our socks for the Collaborative Journalism Summit.
Love them.
And if you come, you get a pair. And they're expensive too.
I will be there. I need to buy my flight ticket, but I will be there.
So it's like it's gonna be like purple on the bottom and purple toe, and then we also have one that's red on the bottom and red toe, and they all say like socks, journalists work better together.
You've made my day.
That was all Joe. That was all Joe Amditas. All right,
a
I'm
lot
gonna
of
stop
fun.
sharing. Yeah, pretty cool. I'm excited about that. So if you haven't registered yet, register and come so you get your socks.
Yes. Those are socks worth traveling across the country for.
Right? They're cool.
Walk a mile in Heather socks.
Oh, hi everybody. Welcome back from your breakout room where we're talking about socks and all sorts of fun stuff. So like we did before, let's do a little bit of share out and raising some of like the big things that come up. We have a little bit of time left in the schedule, but I also recognize that y'all are busy people. So we'll be efficient and effective with our use of time, and then we'll talk about what's coming next, and next conversations and next resources that are going to get shared out. So I'm going to share my screen, and we'll do this in group order again. So I have, I think you can probably see group 1 slide here. So I'm just, yeah, if anybody from that group would want to share, like what was one of the big things that you feel like, you want to make sure a partner understands about how you work. I'm intrigued by this question about, do they need to know the history? I don't know if anybody wants to say more about that.
I'll let Sam take that. That was yours.
So, I think part of the question that we were dissecting was, what, to play the devil's advocate on that, what do potential partners not need to know about your organization, and so the question then becomes, one should ideally act in full transparency, but also for the purposes of a collaboration, the collaboration may just be one deliverable, maybe one project that your organization is involved with. So how much do they need to know deeply about your organization in order to achieve the aims of the project itself? And so in other words, do they need to know absolutely everything? Because that could potentially bog down a project, all the gory details, and so that was just something that we talked a little bit about. I mean, just to play the devil's advocate.
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting question, thinking of like the life cycle of collaboration, and potentially like a collaborative may be evolving into something new, and that may be the reason to bring on new partners. And just thought it was an interesting thing to think about, and how collaboratives form.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very interesting. Yeah, especially when thinking about like projects that have been running, and then what does the on-ramp look like for a new partner to come into an existing project. It's a really interesting thing to think about. Anything else from this group, or we'll jump to the next one?
I mean, it's pretty basic stuff. The rest of it was a lot about structure, like how are things structured, be it staff, partners, organization, editorial, etc. That was the big thing.
All right, for let's see, group 2, anybody want to share things out from this slide? I'd love to hear a little bit more about this, the safety of the writers and the stories that are feasible. I think those are really interesting aspects to bring up and flag for this conversation. If anybody wants to add any more on that.
I think that was probably me. Yukari Kane with the Prison Journalism Project. We work with incarcerated writers. We train them in the tools of journalism, and we publish their stories ourselves and in partnership with other newsrooms, and which means that our writers are in severely restricted environments, various degrees of even a hostile situation, and 2, that our writers are essentially student journalists. That's probably the closest thing. And so we want and need our partners to know that to be aware of the safety considerations and how even just going to the corrections department to seek comment could trigger some responses that could endanger a writer, especially if they're not prepared for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great point to bring up. Thank you. Any other observations from the slide that anyone wants to expand on? Some of the things I'm seeing here that I think are interesting for us to kind of take forward as we move in this work. Just I'm seeing in the slide and a little bit in the others as well, is like this time in which you decide what partners need to understand about you is also your opportunity to kind of establish boundaries for what is acceptable to you as an organization, the way that you are going to care for your team, your audience, what's going to work for you with regard to what other organizations need to understand about that. And I think that's a really fascinating part of this, because it's very, very rare that you will have a partner that's exactly matched to you in terms of like power and resources, and those power imbalances make this sort of like boundary setting important. We've had conversations with newsrooms who are like small newsrooms, or they're working in communities that are historically marginalized or have been harmed by journalism. They'll be the organization that's been in that community, right? Like doing right by that community, rebuilding trust, being accountable to them. And another organization will want to work with them because they want access to that community without having necessarily done that same level of effort, and what does it mean for you to say, okay, yes, we'll work with you, but here are things you need to understand about how we are going to still protect the people we work with, how we're going to advocate for the people that we work with, and how we're going to ensure that you're not extracting from them. That conversations come up with newsrooms I worked with that are like they're indigenous newsrooms, and like an urban newsroom will want access to that community and will want to partner with the indigenous newsroom for that, to be able to reach that community specifically. But how do you ensure it's not just sort of like a shortcut to access without actually understanding what that means then in terms of responsibility? So I see some interesting things here about sort of like establishment of boundaries, establishment of respect and safety here that I think is really important. Oops, sorry, does somebody have something they want to add to that? Please do. I thought I heard someone unmute. Okay. Group 3 want to expand on what you have here?
I think everybody's shy, and I'm not sure who wants to speak up. But since I put 2 of the 3 up, I'll go. This is Eric. Yeah, let me just start off by saying it's interesting because I think that question will elicit different answers based on where you are in your own headspace in relation to your organization. So I recently had a little difficult conversations. So as you can see, there's some talk about internal tension and bureaucracy and process, and who we cater to. So yeah, there's existing cultures inside organizations that I think anyone collaborating with another organization should be aware of some of the politics and culture that exists. And that's not always a bad thing, but there's just like a sort of language that exists within each organization that you might have to adapt to. The other piece about catering, like who our audience is, or who we think our audience is or are. It's important to have alignment in terms of goals between organizations. You might have one organization who is squarely focused on, millennials or Gen Z, and you might have another organization who is all about baby boomers, right? And what you produce is going to look very different for those different audiences. So it's important to just be aware of those potential misalignments. And then I think it was Mariella who shared the editorial policy in the state of editorial independence. So Mariella.
Yeah, sure. I can talk about that a little bit. Thank you, Eric. So I just brought that up because different news organizations have different factors that influence the way that they do their reporting. So for example, the example that I brought up in the group was that sometimes news organizations do sponsored content, right? But there needs to be a clear understanding of how that's being done. And if, for example, anyone that sponsors the content could actually have interests that go against some of the journalism collaboration partners.
Yeah. Yeah, that brings up an interesting thing. Like every organization, you like already you have your own level of associations that could potentially affect how your community views the work that you're doing. And then when you add in collaborative partners, you've just multiplied the number of associations that people might consider when they view the work that's being produced. And that definitely adds some complexity to this. Any other thoughts here before we jump to the next one?
You know, I have to touch on that sponsored content piece for a bit, because that just falls right into my lane. You know, branded content, sponsored content. I do an awful lot of that with New Jersey Urban News, but you know, the partners have absolutely no say in what we do editorially. And you know, there's no prohibition on our writers to report on an issue or a topic that might shed some bad light on a potential sponsor or advertiser. And so, and it's clearly identified, and it must be. And I think how it's super important to, you know, have the editorial team on board with that process from the start. And then in that way, you know, you sort of eliminate a lot of the uncertainty and questions around, you know, pay to play and quid pro quo and all that sort of stuff, right? So there just isn't any question or ambiguity around the fact that this content is being sponsored, who it's being sponsored by, that has no relation at all to do with the editorial integrity of everything else that we do. So communicating that early on and often, and having the editorial team on board is key to a successful sponsored branded content sort of outline strategy.
Thank you for that.
Welcome.
All right, here we go. Our last group. So group 4, what do we expand on values, goals, and details on the efforts?
Hi, Heather. Nicole here. I can speak on those two. I feel like we talked mostly and then we kind of jumped onto Jamboards. But yeah, the first one he wrote down was obviously explaining our values, letting our partners know where we stand and possibly where we might be moving forward in the future. I think that's been something that we've been kind of tackling here at the AJC. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution has been around for several years, and just our values have changed. We're trying to be more collaborative with our partners, with the stories that we share, and obviously better represent a very diverse Atlanta, a very diverse city. So that's something that we've tried to just keep that in the forefront in our conversations as to, you know, what are our values, what stories are of interest to our audience, and just absolutely, you know, kind of give you those stories that our audience wants to see more of. And that kind of goes to being transparent with our goals. That's something that I think I've kind of come across with each partnership. And again, I don't know if I mentioned this here, but in our other group, our partnerships are very, very new. We're not even up to 2 years yet. So just being transparent with what we're trying to do. It was very important what you said, Heather, on not trying to create a shortcut for us and get us kind of as somewhat cheat code into accessing a community that another, you know, hyper local newsroom, a smaller newsroom, has worked very hard to accomplish on their end. That's not something that we want to do. So that's something we've been trying to be transparent with when it comes to our storytelling on our end. And I loved what I think the last group just said about, oh, sorry, I just now forgot it. Sorry, it'll come back to me. It'll come back to me. Jean, I don't know if you want to take the next slide.
Thanks. I mean, one of the things we were talking about was just like, what does collaboration mean? And like, you know, do you mean just content sharing? Or do you mean like actually co-reporting or something in between, or, you know, and kind of just, it's taken on such a life of its own, and yet it covers so many different relationships. So I think sometimes I've gotten in deep into a conversation and realized that like we're operating from two very different definitions of what working together is.
Yeah, it's a really, really important part of it. Okay, I'm going to end my screen share. I just want to make space for anybody if they want to like share anything that like stood out or has come to mind as you've heard other people chat here, and then we can talk about kind of big picture and next steps for this conversation.
I heard somebody at the first round talked about you know, communication pathways, and I think it's also important to consider like the frequency of communication and check-ins, what medium that will take place on, what are the, you know, how do you set up those meetings? Meetings are just so much of collaborative journalism projects, and I think they sort of are taken for granted that they're just going to happen. And I know that we talked about project roles and responsibilities, but it's often important to either designate that. Well, first of all, designate that, and then also consider you know, some form of rotating designation to include everybody, so that there's an equally shared burden, or at least people get an opportunity from different organizations to lead the conversation and guide the rest of the group.
Yeah, absolutely. The communication strategy, and then I would pair that with documentation. Like the view that I've taken on documentation is equity. It is the only way that everybody can fully participate is if everybody has the same level of access to understanding what has happened, what is happening, what is being said at conversations, what is being planned. If people are excluded, they start to just like step back and step back and step back because they don't feel like they have the information they need to actually participate. Well, I really, really appreciate this conversation. So maybe some context for next steps. A lot of like what I was hearing in this piece of the discussion is a lot about like the internal like kind of taking stock of, okay, what are we about and what do people need to know about us, which is interesting because that's actually kind of similar like to some of the early stuff in the collaborative journalism workbook that we worked on a few years ago. It was a lot of like, are you ready to collaborate, and what do you need to make sure you know about your own organization before you start doing stuff with other organizations and with other partners. So I heard a lot of things from that. So my goal from the materials that we put together today, and Joe's already gotten a jump start on some of this as well, is we're kind of putting together a resource, which is sort of like how to articulate to potential partners things about yourself that they need to understand in order to work with you, approach you, how they would actually go about doing that, help you figure out, you know, is there something here to a partnership? And that's kind of like this next phase of what we're doing. And then the idea for those materials is those will inform the next piece of work we're doing around actual like scope of work, project outlines, MOUs, like the actual agreements that govern projects, because you use all of this information to then figure out how do we actually structure these projects. We're gonna have that conversation starting at the Collaborative Journalism Summit in June, and there'll be materials shared with this group. But overall, the long arc of this and the resources that are being created here is, out of the first one, we have a draft of a public facing collaboration policy that you could build off of and actually use. And that would be shared on, you know, wherever it is you share things with your community about the work that you do and how you do it. Out of these conversations, it's materials that you can kind of build off of, articulating how collaborations work for your organizations for potential partners and how they can engage with you and how they might approach you in order to propose a collaboration, and what it looks like to actually start to work that out together. And then this third phase is example agreements, whether you have something that's more informal, like a scope of work that everybody is understanding, or if you have to have the more formal, you know, memorandum of understanding. So our goal is that you're going to have like a series of resources and documents that you can just adapt and build off of and then customize that will suit your organization's needs from this. And then we'll make sure that this gets shared with everybody who's been participating in these conversations all along. So with that being said, I want to be mindful of our time. Are there any questions, comments, ideas for things that you would like to see happen at a future conversation about this, I am always more than happy to have additional sessions on this. The thing that we do at the Collaborative Journalism Summit will be about agreements, but if we find that there's a need for another kind of working conversation where we dig into something specific, happy to facilitate and help that in whatever way. But we could figure out what else do folks need to kind of have a full set of resources here so that you can articulate this from a policy perspective, both internally and externally. Well, I'm happy to.
Well,
Oops, sorry.
I
go
have
ahead.
I have an idea if that's okay.
Please.
I know that some news organizations are doing work to try to combat online misinformation, and I think it would be really interesting to see some information about how to collaborate on that specific topic, since that that can bring up certain challenges, right, that are different than sharing content to publish and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I would love to have more conversations about that. I will reach out to you. I want to hear more.
Thanks. Okay.
Okay, so my next step is I'm going to pull together our pieces from this conversation today. I think Joe will be able to send that out to everybody after the fact. Wants to do that. Is that right in my understanding? Okay, thank you. Joe has all of the Eventbrite powers, so I wanted to confirm. So we'll
Yes,
get those
absolutely.
talks. Sorry.
I
All
said
the
yes,
powers.
absolutely. I'll send all that over. I'm going to send some in the chat now with a few lists of links, but yes.
Thank you.
You'll get a well-formatted list, everyone.
I do appreciate a well-formatted list. Okay, well, I deeply appreciate y'all participating in this and contributing to this conversation. We'll share the outline of everything that was created. We'll share next steps for future conversations. And then as we continue to move forward, the resources that are getting generated, the templates and the things that you'll be able to kind of build off of will all just be made available with, you know, the idea that you take it and remix it and make it useful in whatever way you need it to be for your organization. So thank you for making time for this. Thank you for participating in this. We deeply appreciate that. And we'll share contact information in the documents that get sent out. I'm more than happy to have follow-up conversations if anybody wants to chat about this offline as well. So good to see you all. Joe, I'll turn it back to you for whatever closeout you need to.
I appreciate it. It's amazing as always. Such useful information and facilitation. So I really appreciate you, Heather. Thank you so much, and thank you to everybody who joined. As we said, we've got the recording, the transcript, and all the goodies. Don't forget to register for the Collaborative Journalism Summit. We're in DC. I put the link in the chat. I'll see you there. You'll get a pair of awesome socks if you show up. So we'll see you there. Hopefully, June 6th and 7th. We'll see you there. Bye,
Awesome.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Be well.